There was a time when anyone would tremble upon hearing the name Al Capone. Not just a notorious gangster, Capone was the kingpin of Chicago's underworld, ruling with an iron fist. His empire, built on bootlegging and gambling, became one of the most feared criminal syndicates in America. He didn't just crush his rivals, he obliterated them, using bribery, intimidation, and violence to maintain his stranglehold on power. Capone made many enemies along the way, from rival mobsters to law enforcement and even the government itself. His life was a relentless battle against anyone who dared to cross him, including high-profile figures in politics. But in a twist of fate, it wasn't a rival gang or a police raid that brought him down. It was the IRS. Yes, the man who ruled the underworld fell to tax evasion, a stunning irony for such a feared figure. Before he became the infamous Scarface, Capone's beginnings were far from glamorous. He rose from the depths of poverty to become the most powerful gangster in the nation, and his story is a chilling reminder of how unchecked ambition and greed can lead to a life of crime. Let's go back to 1899, where a young Al Capone was born into a world of struggle and hardship. Let's go back to 1899, where a young Al Capone was born into a world of struggle and hardship. Born in Brooklyn, New York, to Italian immigrant parents, Capone was no stranger to poverty. The family lived in a cramped tenement, surrounded by the noise and chaos of a bustling city. Young Al was the fourth of 9 children, and his parents worked tirelessly to make ends meet. His father, a barber, and his mother, a seamstress, struggled to provide for their large family, instilling in Capone a fierce desire to rise above his circumstances. As a child, Al was drawn to the streets, where he quickly learned the ways of survival. He found himself in rough neighborhoods, running with other kids who, like him, had dreams of escape. By the age of 14, he dropped out of school, partly due to being expelled for hitting a teacher during a confrontation. This incident pushed him further into the world outside formal education, where he felt the need to help support his family. He took odd jobs, but the allure of the streets and the promise of quick money pulled him deeper into a world of crime. While working as a bartender in a mob-run saloon, Capone earned his nickname Scarface after he made a lewd remark to another gangster's sister. The brother slashed Capone across his left cheek, leaving him with both a scar and his infamous moniker. Soon, Capone moved himself, his new wife, and their young son to Chicago. It's said that the move to Chicago came about with an invitation from his mentor, Johnny Torrio, to join him there. Torrio met Capone in New York years prior and had since established himself in Chicago. It's believed he saw talent in the young Capone. Interestingly, the crime boss Torrio had been working under in Chicago was assassinated within a year of Capone's arrival, paving the way for Torrio to take over. Some also note that Capone nearly killed a low-ranking member of another gang in New York and may have fled to Chicago to escape the promised retaliation. Capone arrived in Chicago just as prohibition took effect across the country. While Americans mourned their right to drink intoxicating liquors, organized crime saw a new lucrative business opportunity in front of them. Soon, bootlegging became the name of the game in the criminal underworld across the country, with an estimated 1,300 gangs in Chicago alone by the mid-1920s. When Torrio was shot outside his home and later convicted of bootlegging, he handed the reins of the Chicago syndicate over to Capone. At just 26 years old, Capone was suddenly in charge of the outfit's dealings, and he quickly proved himself. Capone has even been credited with helping Chicago surpass New York as the throne of gang activity. Bootlegging wasn't their only venture, as the gang also engaged in brothels, gambling, extortion, and, at times, murder. The death of some 200 people is said to be Capone's doing. In 1928, Capone was dubbed the greatest gang leader in history by The New Yorker, and by 1929, his net worth was estimated to be in the multi-millions. Capone's epic career paralleled the economic success and opulence of the Roaring Twenties, but by 1929, his dirty yet luxurious life of crime was beginning to unravel. The people of Chicago were growing tired of the gang violence that littered their streets. One of the most famous events attributed to Capone would forever serve as the prime example of gangland violence in Chicago. On February 14th, a group of men entered a garage on the north side of Chicago, where 7 unarmed members of Bugs Moran's gang were lined up and murdered in cold blood. The men, some dressed as police officers, were largely believed to be members of the Capone gang. The killings, known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, would catapult Capone to new levels of infamy, though officials never pinned the murders on him. Soon after, Capone was subpoenaed to appear in court in Chicago for a prohibition violation case, but he postponed it, claiming illness. Despite providing an affidavit, the Bureau of Investigations found that Capone had not been bedridden, but was visiting dog tracks and traveling. Capone eventually appeared in court, but as he left, he was arrested for contempt of court for lying about his illness. President Herbert Hoover, urged by Chicago businessmen, decided Capone must be stopped. On May 17th, Capone and his bodyguard, Frank Klein, were arrested in Philadelphia for carrying concealed weapons. Within 16 hours, they were sentenced to a year in prison. Many speculated Capone may have intentionally sought the sentence to gain protection from rival gangs, though his lawyers denied it. After his release, Capone still faced contempt of court charges. Meanwhile, a 2-pronged investigation began, examining both prohibition violations and Capone's finances for tax evasion. Investigators found no direct evidence of income, bank accounts, or property connected to Capone. Instead, they focused on his lavish lifestyle, arguing that if he lived so grandly, he must have been hiding substantial income. In 1931, Capone was finally charged with 22 counts of income tax evasion. When he arrived in court, he was in high spirits, expecting a lenient sentence due to a plea bargain. However, Judge James H. Wilkerson refused the bargain and sent the case to trial. Capone's trial, beginning in October 1931, highlighted his extravagant expenses, from luxurious silk underwear to custom suits and high-end cars. On October 17, 1931, Capone was convicted on 5 counts of tax evasion and sentenced to 11 years in prison, fines and back taxes amounting to nearly $300,000. After failed appeals, he was transferred from the U.S. Penitentiary in Atlanta to Alcatraz in 1934. By 1938, Capone's health was rapidly deteriorating from untreated syphilis, and he began showing signs of dementia. In November 1939, he was released for good behavior and returned to Florida, where he spent his final years. Al Capone passed away on January 25, 1947, at the age of 48, and just like that, the extraordinarily large life of America's #1 gangster fizzled out, leaving behind an enduring legacy of crime, glamour, and tax evasion.